Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome once again a very senior and respected entrepreneur, a good friend, a fellow member of the YPO, and an expert in creating advisory boards from Johannesburg, South Africa, Mr. Salim Dewji. Salim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. So excited to be here today.
Thank you. Salim is an entrepreneur and he's an advisory board creator. He has experience in telecom, fleet management technology, food, Afro cosmetic distribution, and more. He's an advisory board member. He's a fine dining enthusiast. And as I mentioned, he's a fellow member of the YPO. So, Salim, today we're going to focus more on advisory boards and all the knowledge you have there. And let me start with my first question. What, in your view, is the single most important purpose of an advisory board in today's business environment?
So thank you for the question. Given that an advisory board really addresses a CEO's need,
Yeah.
I would say that the primary reason of having an advisory board is to be a safe haven, a trusted platform for that CEO, to be able to have conversations that you might not easily be able to have with your employees and or with people outside. The focus of the advisory board is to be the support of the CEO in a trusted environment.
Thank you. And how should a founder or CEO decide whether their organization truly needs an advisory board?
So there's a couple of ideas that I can share here. One is that if you find yourself not growing or not creating change, not creating value, you find yourself in a bottleneck and you've tried so many things that just hasn't worked, it means you need outside help. So one thing is, oh, go get a consultant. But actually, an advisory board with the right people on the board can help unblock that path. If you're trying to grow your business, if you're trying to look at an acquisition, depending on your strategy, and that comes to the second piece. If you're unsure how your strategy is evolving or is being executed, having an advisory board can help you through that process. And maybe just adding another point, if you see yourself making the same mistakes over and over again, maybe you need change, right? And the change of approach is often influenced by an advisory board.
Very interesting. What a great response. And Salim, what are some of the biggest misconceptions leaders have about advisory boards?
So one of the biggest misconceptions, and I'll take it from two sides. One is from the CEO or the leader of this company, and the other one is from the board members themselves.
Correct.
So from the from the CEO's perspective, you don't create an advisory board to validate your ideas. Okay? You actually bring in an advisory board to challenge your ideas, right? Even if it's for the sake of going through the process, which should not be the idea. It should be that you have three different views of a particular path you're trying to get onto. So from a owner of the business, let's say it's a founder having an advisory board, don't go create one so that everyone can say, yep, that sounds good. Go for someone to challenge you, to push you. That's one. From the opposite side, if you're an advisory board member, don't join an advisory board just to attend, just to put onto your CV, just to maybe validate that CEO's idea. But the intention is for you to create impact. There's this concept of high value boards, high performance boards, and it really involves that notion, which is you have the right people around you to help you drive in a particular direction, and you would have to have an open space, a
Amazing.
free space.
And Salim, for my viewers and listeners, a lot of them are very young. Could you help us understand the difference in value and function of an advisory board versus a corporate board?
Of course. So there's a very clear, and I'll say almost, boards 101 approach.
Yeah.
A fiduciary board, a legal board, is by definition focusing on the governance, the risk management on behalf of the shareholders, right?
Yeah.
So advisory board is the opposite. They're looking at how do we help this company grow? How do we help the founder or the leader of this advisory board, the CEO of this advisory board, become more productive, look at different avenues of growth. But it's really growth, strategy, and on the other side, governance, control.
Mm.
And also in a board, a fiduciary board, you have legal responsibility of the action that you
Correct.
provide, that you guide, that you give at the board
Right.
level.
Mm.
Advisory board does not have that legal repercussion. So in
Mm.
fact, and that's why I say trusted environment. In fact, when you have an advisory board, you are able to bring in more people, in my opinion, that will be more entrepreneurial, more active. They'll talk about, okay, well,
Yeah.
this is how we can take more risk. This is where you
Mm.
said you want to go. Okay, well, here's some different avenues.
Mm.
Oftentimes, an advisory board can be in parallel, or not in parallel, but in addition to a governance board.
Mm.
Okay, that can also happen.
Yeah. Well said. Moving on, Salim, what key elements must be defined and what qualities should leaders prioritize before they form an advisory board?
So first, I would say know where you are in the life cycle of your business.
Mm.
So obviously, there's many different types of businesses, but there are phases of your business, right? There's a
Mm.
growth phase,
Mm.
stabilization phase, professional phase, exit phase. There's different phases of
Yeah.
your business.
Yeah.
So be clear, where are you now?
Mm.
Okay. And where do you want to go?
Mm.
Because the kind of people you bring around, you can only bring value if you have that clarity.
Mm.
If you don't have that clarity, you might end up selecting the wrong board members.
Mm.
So the first thing is be clear on your objectives. Once you have objective clarity, you can then define the roles that you want.
Mm.
Oh, I actually am looking to get into, I'm an African business and I want to get into India, for example,
Mm.
or
Mm.
even vice versa, right? So if I'm an Indian business wanting to get into Africa, I better
Yeah.
bring in somebody on the board that has done that before.
Mm. Mm.
This is something that I often seek is when you select a board member, ideally they should have done what you want them to do with you or for
Correct.
you, because
Correct.
the point is to show you your blind spots, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you define forming the board? One is very clear objectives, capacity gaps. What are you weak at? What are
Mm.
you weak at so that these advisors can supplement? All right. So
Well
those are
said.
the kind of
Yeah.
things that I would
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I would
Amazing.
recommend.
And what, in your view, is the ideal size of an advisory board?
So I would say five for me is a magic number.
Mm-hmm.
It's enough so that you can have diversity of thought, you can have deep dialogue. Dialogue is actually very, very critical.
Mm.
When you're having advisory board meetings, yes, you can have data. I mean, all that can come even on the pre-reads, but you want to be able to have dialogue. That's the
Mm.
key. It's
Mm.
not a reporting environment. Let us show you the numbers of the last quarter. Let's understand why this didn't go up, why this didn't go down. My recommendation is an advisory board should have five people with three or four very diverse people. All
Mm.
right. And diverse people, again, remember where you are in the phase of your business and where
Right.
you're trying to go.
Correct. Correct. And how can leaders ensure diversity of thought, background, and experience in their advisory boards?
So I would like to share, and I had this conversation about something happening in Dubai, and someone wanted to bring in diversity, and they said, "Okay, I've got these three Indian people," and one person said, "Well, if you have three Indian people, then you don't have diversity. Why don't you get different nationalities?"
Mm.
But I reflected, and I'll use the Indian community as an
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
Is
please.
you actually can have easily three different mindsets in those Indians, right?
Correct.
We have Indians that have been born and brought up in the West,
Yeah.
those that have been from Africa, those that have been brought up and doing business in India. To be
Mm.
honest, same skin color, but three very, very different
Absolutely.
schools of
Yep.
thoughts, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's the first thing is understand what you mean by diversity and don't get boxed in
Mm.
just because of what I just shared.
Mm. Mm.
So I would say to ensure diversity, look for people with different backgrounds.
Right.
Okay. Make sure that you have industry diversity as well. For example, just because you're in FMCG, don't say, okay, I'm the CEO and I will bring in four people from the FMCG sector because that's my role. Actually, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe the reason why you're stuck is because you've only been looking at your industry as a reference point.
Mm. Mm.
Maybe the newness, the change might be from a different sector.
Mm.
And you know, we always talk about technology
Yeah.
for the last decades. More and more companies are becoming stronger technology focused, especially with AI. Bring in that kind of thought, even
Mm.
if they're not in the FMCG space, as long
Correct.
as they're into the B2C kind of space, right? That's good enough. Bring that kind of diversity.
Mm. Well said. What are some of the common mistakes organizations make after creating an advisory board?
Common mistakes. Advisory boards are not to say yes, sir, to the
Absolutely.
CEO. Okay. They are there to challenge, which I've said, and treat it as a working body.
Mm,
Meet frequently, I would
mm,
say at least quarterly, and create a performance measurement of the board itself.
mm,
And don't put your friends. This is not about validating again what you think is right. I trust this person. Let me bring this person. You're not bringing someone on your advisory board that you trust.
mm,
You're bringing people that are competent, that are subject matter experts, that are helping you move from point A to point B because you struggled to get there.
mm,
And by the way, this is also a great opportunity for you to be able to take a little bit of risk,
mm.
right? I remember having a conversation once with someone about a board and said, we need to have a magical experience when a consumer or customer walks into our shop. I
Mm.
said, have we thought of having, even for 3 months, even for a year, a magician on our board? And the guy said, Salim, what's wrong with you, man? A magician? I
Yeah.
said, man, think about it. What did you just say out of your mouth? When a consumer walks in, they must have a magical experience. Where do
Mm.
you find magic? Who can teach you about magic? Because it's not about the magic trick itself. It's about the psychology of
Correct.
how do you execute something so that you wow, you surprise, you create something intense and fun. And if that's where you want to go, bring in people that have been into that. Maybe you bring somebody from Cirque du Soleil, okay?
Mm.
But my point is, if you want to, you have hundreds and hundreds of stores, you want to differentiate yourself, hey, maybe look at that. One or two ideas would probably make a huge difference.
What a great response. Thank you. Um, I know you've been telling me that, bring in advisory boards with different kinds of skill sets. But what role can advisory boards play in fostering innovation and digital transformation?
So I think one of the challenges we're having is that there's a lot of stuff coming in.
Hmm.
Innovation, we've been talking about a long time, a lot of technology coming in more and more. Today, it is not unusual to find leaders inundated with so many things that they actually freeze. They're not sure what to do.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, when you're not sure what to do, you don't do anything.
Hmm.
Or you go to a default. So, a couple of things. One of the ways of fostering innovation is bring people that can take all complexity and bring it to simplicity. There's
Hmm.
so much noise out there, just focus on one item. There's
Correct.
1,000 things you can do with AI.
Hmm.
Choose one.
Hmm.
Choose one, for example,
Hmm.
right? Bring in people that can understand patterns, that can connect the dots.
Hmm.
And in fact, if you have three or four very diverse board members, you may have one that is a strong facilitator or a strong
Hmm.
strategist or a strong dot connector, if I
Hmm.
can use very simple words.
Hmm.
So that's what you want. You want to be able to have people that are able to connect the dots, not focusing on the past.
Hmm.
Right? So look, in the past, this is what I did, therefore I can do that for you.
Hmm.
Right? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes, by the way, digital transformation only happens by ensuring that the company itself is driven for that. There's a culture of
Hmm.
innovation. You should not have a board that says, yes, you need to do this, you need to do that, but the values and the culture of the organizations don't align. So simply understanding that whatever happens in the advisory board needs to align with what's happening in the business is absolutely critical. In
Hmm.
fact, when you bring in an advisory board together, they should go and visit the business, meet the
Correct.
people, understand the kind of business this is. Otherwise, a lot of the conversations, the dialogue I mentioned at the board level without context will be futile.
Very interesting. How can a leader create the right culture and chemistry among advisory board members?
So, sometimes we walk into a room and there's only one guy talking,
Yeah.
always one guy talking. So I think we have to be very careful to assess the kinds of people that you're coming in.
Hmm.
So the one thing I would say is everyone should have respect. Cultures can be different, backgrounds can be different, expertise should definitely be different. But what should be a non-negotiable is respect. And
Hmm.
part of that respect is allowing everyone to be able to contribute.
Hmm.
So ideally have a very strong facilitator to help you build the board culture.
Hmm.
Before your meeting, have dinner the night before. Have a lot of loose talk. Make sure that there's synergy and that there is conversations that are happening even outside the boardroom. You
Hmm.
have to create the excitement. You have to create a feel of peerdom. And if you end up bringing a very high profile person on the board that feels that they are stronger or better than the others. In fact, the CEO might even make the mistake of just looking more and more at that person, even
Mm,
the visual contact. When I sit at an advisory board capacity, one of the things that I do often when I'm the chair is I try to ensure everyone has got something to speak. In
mm,
fact, I leave 10 minutes at the end and I call everybody's name. Joe,
mm,
David, I call everyone's name. So no one has the opportunity to say, I didn't have talk time, right?
yes, yes.
And if you actually don't contribute, I will come to you after the meeting and say, hey, you're fairly quiet. Is everything okay? Was there something bothering you?
Yeah,
Etc. Etc.
yeah, yeah. And do you see any synergy or a conflict between an advisory board and a corporate board?
I don't see conflict because the function is different,
Mm,
right? So, for example, the audit function will sit under the fiduciary board,
mm,
right?
mm,
Anything governance related can sit there.
mm,
But the more risk looking at, evaluating, supporting blind spots, new ideas, understanding perhaps insights on operations, all that conversation can happen there. You don't
mm.
want to go through operations at the governance board,
Right.
right? So there is a different space and a different conversation in the advisory board. Therefore, I see no conflict.
Very interesting. And how can you hold, or how can a leader or a board hold an advisory board accountable?
So first, I would say you should have defined terms.
Mm,
2 years, 3 years, have defined terms. And then, in fact, before you will have brought in the person, you will have agreed on what is the skill sets that you need.
mm,
Okay. Track participation. Make sure people are not just showing up, but that there's talk time, right? Monitor the quality, not the quantity of engagement as well.
mm,
Okay. Uh, Make sure that everyone is doing their pre-reads,
mm.
right? So that the conversations that you're having is starts where the pre-read ends.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at having an accountable, having a more motivated board, work on the unity aspect, the Puritan
Mm,
that we spoke of a short while ago, but also focus on the delivery for
mhm.
which they were brought in and have one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
As a CEO, you're welcome to do that. In fact, in some cases, I've even asked that the CEO should not lead the advisory board, that they
Okay.
could be an independent person leading the
Mm,
advisory board
mm,
so that the CEO can just be there and participate and engage and observe. Because as a chair, you also have a different role to make sure that certain things are happening.
mm,
And if the CEO is taking care of a lot of these things, it might make it a little bit more difficult to him. But it also depends. Oftentimes, when your fiduciary board is very small, or if it's a family business, it's just there because it's a family business, or if it's just there to tick the box that you have
mm,
a fiduciary board, then the
mm,
advisory board takes on a different function.
mm. Very interesting. How should organizations approach compensation or incentivize for advisory board members?
So again, depending on the size of business and the phase of business,
Yeah.
you can create different compensation models.
Mm,
Obviously, the one obvious one is you pay per day, right?
mm,
For every day you are on the board, we'll pay you X plus maybe your travel fees, etc. All the costs of travel, accommodation, hotels, all that is generally
mm,
covered if you're
mm,
traveling to it. So there is a cost structure, and if I had to throw a number, it can be anything between $50,000 and $200,000,
mm.
right? But it also depends how often you meet and how much and the
Correct.
level of the people that you're bringing.
Mm,
There's also another a combination model or a hybrid model where you can bring in people and say, look, I'm bringing you here to help me with the exit. And when
mm,
I get the exit, then I'll compensate you.
mm.
Okay. You can also create that. So it depends on what the advisory board was set up for. Then you build the compensation model around that. Again, coming back, know clearly where you are today, where you want to go, and what is the role of these individuals.
Very interesting. I have time for two more questions for you. Uh, how should an organization review and refresh an advisory board and its composition?
So there are a couple of ideas here. One
Mm,
is it could be time bound. Every 2 years, every 3 years, every 4 years, you refresh and make this clear and upfront. The other one is, and this has actually happened to me, where I left a board that I helped create because in the first maybe year, one of the key strategic initiatives was to be able to do blah, blah, blah. Now,
mm,
that initiative required different people on the board. Even
mm,
though I had helped define and create the board, define everybody around the table, I realized that actually I wasn't going to be able to create significantly more impact
Mm.
than the new ideas that came out, which required a different mindset. In
Mm.
this case, looking at listing overseas.
Yeah.
So we needed people that have taken a company towards a listing phase,
Mm.
right? How do you plan for it? What is the governance structure around it, et cetera, et cetera? Of course, you can hire consultants, but if you hire people that have gone through the process as owners themselves
Yeah.
of businesses that have listed, obviously you get all the insights,
Correct.
right? You can
Correct.
even get feedback say, don't do it, I did it, it was horrendous, or vice versa, and bring
Mm.
both of those. One that says don't do it and one that says better do it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So as your phase in business also changes, as your strategy might change,
Mm.
that's when you might decide to refresh. So
Very.
one is time bound, which is
Mm.
good practice, and the other one is based on where you are on the cycle of the business.
Mm. Amazing. And my last question for you, Salim. Looking ahead, what will advisory boards of the future require that today's boards do not yet offer?
So this will start kind of, I think, sizing the kind of people you should be bringing on.
Mm.
One are members or board members that learn fast.
Mm.
The world is now moving at an incredible pace. And it's one thing to say, I'm a subject matter in X, okay, which is sure a
Mm.
basis. But it's actually more important that even if you're strong in transformation, strong in technology, strong in FMCG, whatever it might be, the evolution now at which your industry, your subject is changing due to technology is going extremely fast. So
Mm.
you need to identify people that can learn fast.
Mm.
Even connecting the dots is important, but now connecting the dots with the new knowledge that's coming in. So
Mm.
you need to be able to anticipate change in a way that is much more rapid with a
Mm.
lot more information that,
Mm.
by the way, even your competitors have.
Mm.
So the ability to have what I would call a digital fluency, right? Be able to understand,
Yeah.
capture all this information, and even I will say diversity mindset. And we spoke about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Cognitive diversity, right? Understand different views, different aspects on
Mm.
how something has been done.
Right.
And maybe one thing to add is the people that understand excellence. And that
Correct.
excellence does not happen by mistake. And this is one of my mottos, right? You don't fall into excellence. You actually create the platform that delivers excellence.
Mm, very interesting. And on that note, Salim, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been. Talking to you, it is always is a learning experience. Today, we thought we'll focus only on advisory boards, and you have such a wealth of knowledge and experience that you have shared with me and all my viewers and listeners on different aspects of advisory boards. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.